Today, we are talking about a topic that may have caught your eye, and it's a little uncomfortable to talk about, but super common, and it's undigested food in your stool. So let's be honest, when you go to the bathroom and notice food particles, especially things like leafy greens, corn, quinoa, or even nuts and seed pieces, it can be alarming. You might think, is my gut not working? Am I even digesting anything, getting anything out of the food? And sometimes this is what sends people down a rabbit hole of food restrictions, cutting out entire foods or entire food groups, or blaming everything on their microbiome. But here's what I want you to know up front. Seeing undigested food is not a diagnosis, it's a signal, a sign that your digestive system might need a little more support, but not necessarily through restriction. And often the problem starts much earlier than most people realize. So today we're going to break this down into a really digestible way, pun intended. I'll take you through what's normal and what's not when it comes to undigested food, why the digestive process actually begins in your mouth, the role of stomach acid in properly breaking down your meals, and most importantly, what you can do starting today to improve digestion and feel more confident about the food you're eating. And don't worry, this isn't about making your life harder or putting you on some unrealistic gut health protocol. It's just about understanding your body better so you can stop feeling stuck in symptom management mode and start moving toward true digestive resilience. Let's start with the basics. Why does undigested food sometimes show up in your stool in the first place? It can feel unsettling when it happens, especially if you weren't expecting it. But here's the reassuring part. Some amount of visible food matter is actually totally normal from time to time, especially when we're eating a diet that includes a variety of high fiber plant foods. There are certain foods that are just not fully broken down by our digestive system, no matter how healthy it is. These include things like corn, beans, flax seeds, quinoa, raw leafy greens, bell pepper skins, and even tomato peels. These foods are often high in insoluble fiber, which resists breakdown by both our digestive enzymes and gut bacteria. So if you occasionally see a corn kernel or a speck of spinach, don't panic. It doesn't automatically mean something is wrong. Insoluble fiber actually plays a helpful role in digestion. It adds bulk to your stool and helps speed up the transit time through the colon. So just because it's not digestible doesn't mean that it's not serving a purpose. And because it's not digestible, some of it just passes right through you by design. But when it's happening consistently, or if you're seeing multiple types of undigested food in each bowel movement, especially if you're also dealing with other symptoms, then it's worth a closer look. It becomes less of a one off and more of a pattern, then your body might be trying to call attention to something. So, here are the red flags to watch out for. If you're seeing undigested food in your stool more than just occasionally, if you notice entire chunks of food, like identifiable pieces of vegetable or meat, not just flecks of fiber. If you're also experiencing gas, bloating, urgency, or loose stools, if your stools are floating or oily, which can suggest fat malabsorption, if you're also feeling run down, weak, or fatigued without a clear cause, or if you've been told you have low iron, low B12, or other nutrient deficiencies despite a healthy diet, or if you've unintentionally lost weight without trying. So, when you start connecting these dots, it usually means there's some part of your digestion that isn't functioning as it should. And the tricky part is it's often not just one thing. Digestion works like a domino effect, it's a cascade of events, and each step depends on the step before it. If something gets skipped or compromised early on, poor chewing or low stomach acid, it doesn't just stay isolated in the stomach. It throws off the entire chain reaction all the way down. For example, let's say you're eating quickly, clearly chewing, and not really present with your meals. We've all done that, right? So that alone reduces saliva production and enzyme signaling and acid production. And your stomach doesn't really get that full signal to produce acid. And without enough acid, protein doesn't break down properly, and fiber can also stay more intact. Without protein breakdown, your pancreas doesn't release enough enzymes, and that means food moves into your small intestine underdigested, which irritates your gut lining, feeds the wrong bacteria, and ultimately shows up as undigested food in your poop. That's why I say this isn't just about your gut, it's about your whole system. It's about how you're eating, not just what you're eating. Your nervous system plays a massive role in digestion. If you're eating when you're stressed, distracted, multitasking, or in fight or flight mode, your digestive system is basically running on airplane mode, just doing the bare minimum to keep things moving. And unfortunately, the bare minimum is not enough to fully break down a nutritious, high fiber meal. So, yes, it's about your gut, but it's also about your habits, your nervous system, your meal timing, and your awareness while eating. And this is actually good news because it means you have a lot of control over it. Instead of jumping straight into a restrictive food list or blaming our microbiome for everything, we can just step back and look at some of the simple foundational pieces. We can ask, am I chewing well? Am I sitting down for my meals in a calm state? Am I giving myself enough time to eat? Am I supporting the natural flow of digestion from top down? These small adjustments can create a huge difference, sometimes even more than adding supplements or changing your entire diet. So don't assume that undigested food is a reason to cut the food out. I've had many clients tell me, "Up, lettuce is a trigger for me because I see lettuce in my stool." So that doesn't mean that you're having an issue with lettuce. It could just be that you're not supporting your digestion well enough to break down something that has a lot of fiber. So the lettuce is on the scene of the crime, but it's not the bad guy. Just think of this as your body saying, hey, I need a little more support here. And by tuning in early before things kind of spiral into full on symptoms or imbalance, you can get things back on track. So now that we know undigested food in your stool often reflects something going wrong upstream, let's start with the very first step of the digestive process, and that is chewing. Now, actually, technically, the first step is when you see and smell food. And even that starts to signal for your body to produce acid and enzymes. And then when the food actually gets in your mouth, here's where the real digestion begins. And I know this sounds too basic to matter. Most of us don't think of chewing as anything more than something to do quickly to just get the food enough to a chewed up state so we can swallow it. But chewing is one of the most overlooked and underused tools we have to improve digestion. It's natural, it's affordable, it's accessible, and it gives you immediate benefits. So, because the mechanical breakdown of food happens, but it also sends signals to the rest of the digestive tract to get ready. When you chew your food thoroughly, you trigger the release of saliva, which contains enzymes like amylase and lipase, and these help start breaking down carbohydrate and fats before the food even leaves your mouth. And then chewing also activates that cephalic phase of digestion, which is basically the signal your brain sends to your gut that food is coming. So it tells your stomach to start producing acid. It gets your pancreas ready to release enzymes, and it primes the gallbladder to release bile for fat digestion. So the chewing actually sets this whole cascade into motion. And when we skip this step or rush through it, we're essentially asking the rest of our digestive system to play catch up. So let's take an example. Say you eat a salad with a mix of leafy greens, sunflower seeds, chopped raw veggies, maybe even some grilled chicken. If you take 3 bites and swallow, your stomach's getting a whole bunch of undigested material. It's not been softened or broken down. Your stomach acid hasn't really had time to properly kick in, and your pancreas and gallbladder haven't gotten this full signal to get to work. So that food sits longer in your stomach, it ferments more in your small intestine, and it's more likely to show up as undigested matter in your stool. Not to mention, it often leads to bloating, cramping, or a heavy feeling after meals. Now, contrast that with eating the same meal but chewing each bite 20 to 30 times. The texture of the food actually changes in your mouth. You start releasing more enzymes, the stomach acid response is stronger, your body is ready to receive that food and do something with it. Suddenly, that meal becomes easier to digest, even if nothing else about it changed. And this is especially important for people with low stomach acid or low enzyme output or a history of gut issues. If your digestion is already under functioning, chewing becomes your first line of defense. Think of it as your external stomach. You're doing the work on the front end so your gut doesn't have to work as hard later. Since this is such an important part of digestion, let's talk about some practical tips. Now, I have recommended before to chew 30 to 40 times, but I'm not really telling you to count every single chew because that's honestly not realistic for most people. But you do want to try it a couple times to see how many that is. It's a lot of chewing. It's probably about quadruple or more how much chewing you're used to doing. So, what you can focus on is slowing down, setting your fork down between bites versus queuing up that next bite while your mouth is still full of food. Put the fork down, take smaller bites to begin with. Notice the texture of your food and aim for that food to be like a mushy consistency before you swallow it. And I know that sounds a little gross, but that's exactly what your stomach is trying to do, turn food into that kind of mushy, semi-liquid form called chyme. Another trick I recommend, especially if you're eating alone, is to take a few deep breaths before you start the meal. This helps shift your nervous system into a parasympathetic state. That's your rest and digest mode. If you're eating while scrolling through your phone, we're also guilty of this, right? Driving, working, or rushing between meetings, your body stays in sympathetic mode, which is it's activated. Your nervous system is activated, which to you might feel normal, but to your body, that's fight or flight mode. And in that state, digestion is shut down to some extent. Blood flow is diverted away from your stomach, enzymes production is suppressed. So you could be eating the healthiest food in the world, but if you're stressed or distracted while eating, your body's just not going to digest it well. And something I see all the time in my practice is clients eating all the right foods, but they're bloated, exhausted, and confused about food. And when we zoom out, they're also eating while multitasking, barely chewing 5 times, finishing meals under 10 minutes, and simply slowing down and chewing more thoroughly without changing anything about your diet itself often makes a huge difference. Less bloating, more energy, better bowel movements, and yes, less undigested food in the toilet. So here's your challenge for the week. Pick one meal a day where you're going to eat slowly and mindfully. Put your phone away, sit down at a table, take a few deep breaths first, and try to really chew your food. Just observe what happens. How does your body feel? How does your digestion respond? And what do you notice in the bathroom the next day? It may sound too simple to work, but it does. Chewing is free, immediate, and one of the most powerful tools we have for digestion from the top down. Now, let's talk a little more about stomach acid and even digestive enzymes. So, stomach acid is not a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing. It gets a bad rap in the acid reflux or GERD world with all of the acid reducing medications that are prescribed. Actually, the hydrochloric acid is one of your body's best tools for protecting your body and for digesting food. It helps break down protein into amino acids. It triggers the release of digestive enzymes from the pancreas and activates them. It stimulates bile flow to emulsify fats, and it kills off pathogens and prevents bacterial overgrowth. And when your stomach acid is low, and that's surprisingly common, you're not just at risk of poor digestion. You're also more vulnerable to food sensitivities, bloating, infections, and nutrient deficiencies, especially B12, iron, zinc, and calcium. So, some telltale signs of low stomach acid include feeling full or heavy after just a few bites of food, bloating, especially after meals with protein or fat in them, belching or gas after eating, undigested food in your stool, a tendency to avoid meat or feel poorly after eating meat. So, if you are a person who just doesn't like meat, you might want to think about this, or a history of reflux, especially if your reflux has gotten worse with age, because we tend to lose to produce less stomach acid as we age. And so you might be thinking, wait a second, I thought reflux meant I had too much acid. And that's one of the biggest myths. In many cases, reflux is actually caused by too little stomach acid, not too much. And when stomach acid levels are low, food lingers in the stomach longer than it should, and therefore pressure builds up. And the little bit of acid you do have can splash up into the esophagus, and then you get that burning feeling. So, how can we support healthy stomach acid levels? It starts with slowing down, chewing well, and eating in a calm state, which we just covered. But there are a few other tricks. You can try lemon water or apple cider vinegar before meals. You can start with just a teaspoon in a small glass of water, and that helps signal acid production. You can also take digestive bitters before meals, and those are different herbs like things like dandelion, arugula, and they're made into tinctures, and it helps you stimulate your own stomach acid production. Avoid overhydrating with meals, so you don't want to chug most of your fluids with your meals. Sipping is okay, just don't drink a large amount because it will dilute your stomach acid and your enzymes. And then in some cases, and I would recommend doing this under the guidance of a practitioner, we may recommend taking hydrochloric acid supplements. So let's talk about what's normal with poop and what's not normal. Specifically, when it comes to spotting undigested food in your stool, when is it a signal that something deeper could be going on? Because we all want our digestion to be efficient and symptom free, but perfection is not the goal either. Okay, we don't want to overreact to every little change or every little abnormality. Our digestive system is actually designed to be very resilient and adaptive, which means your stool can vary a little bit depending on stress, meals, hydration, hormones. And this is important because I work with a ton of clients. We do a nutrition resolution, and it is very common when you're having digestive issues to become what we call hypervigilant, where you're so used to focusing on your symptoms to try to figure out what's going on and fix it, that you can end up over focusing on every little change in your symptoms and worrying about things that you don't actually need to worry about. So, if you see some undigested food in your stool once in a while, that's okay. So, let's talk about what would be normal. Corn kernels. The outer shell of corn is high in cellulose, which is extremely difficult to break down. Humans just don't make the enzyme needed to digest cellulose. So, kernel corn often shows up in the toilet looking exactly the way it went in. The other thing is flax seeds. So, unless they're ground up, they tend to pass through intact. Same with sesame seeds, sometimes even little sunflower seed bits from a trail mix or bar. Also, leafy greens and fibrous vegetables, especially raw spinach, kale, bell pepper skins, broccoli stalks, asparagus tips. These are very high in insoluble fiber, which resists breakdown in the small intestine. Another thing that can be normal is color changes. For example, beets can make your stool reddish. Blueberries might make your stool darker. And this isn't undigested food per se, but it's pigmentation and it's harmless. So if you see the occasional speck of plant fiber, seed, or skin, that's totally normal, especially if you eat a lot of roughage. But let's talk about what's not normal. So, what I start to get curious about as a clinician is when these signs show up consistently or come with other issues. So, some red flags that you might want to investigate further would be if you're seeing chunks of recognizable food like half a carrot slice, full spinach leaves, or pieces of meat or mushrooms. And by the way, if you're seeing those things, you're definitely not chewing enough, but you still should digest them more than that. Also, seeing multiple types of undigested food in the same bowel movement, because that suggests more widespread digestive dysfunction, not just a one off. If your stool is loose, watery, or urgent, especially after meals, you have floating stools. You're also dealing with nutrient deficiencies like low iron, B12, or vitamin D, or your stools look greasy or oily. So that's when we want to say, okay, maybe you're not absorbing well and you're not breaking down your food well. One of the key reasons I teach clients to look at their poop is because it gives you so much free information. And you don't need a lab test to tell your food isn't breaking down if you're seeing those big particles pass through. So, another thing we want to think about here is timing. If your stool is moving through too fast, like within a few hours of eating, you may not be giving your body enough time to properly break things down. The ideal transit time, which is time from mouth to anus, is 12 to 24 hours. So if you're going within just a couple of hours, especially with loose stools, that's a potential sign of malabsorption or gut inflammation or a nervous system that's saying stuck in overdrive. Now, that means not just going, but passing what you just ate. So we'll talk about how to figure that out in just a second. On the flip side, though, if you're constipated, food can linger for too long and it actually ferments. It can contribute to an overgrowth of bacteria or yeast, and it can cause you to reabsorb toxins throughout the body and feel icky as a result. So, either extreme, too fast or too slow, can impact how well your food is digested. So, here's a little bit of homework, and this is one piece of homework that I give to my clients. Do a simple transit time test. You can use beets, you can use kernel corn, you can use sesame seeds, and you eat those foods and you make a note of the time. And then you time how long it takes for that food. So in the case of beets, for a red color to show up in your stool, or in the case of corn and sesame seeds, you're just going to look for those polka dots in your stool. And this will help you figure out what your transit time in is. Again, normal is 12 to 24 hours. At this point, we have walked through how digestion begins in your mouth, why chewing is so important, how to tell if your undigested food is something to worry about or not. Let me just review your action steps, some solutions for you to help really optimize digestion. So these are things you can do right away. Number one is eat in the rest and digest state. And we touched on this already. This means not eating while you're stressed or distracted. And you can even take those couple of deep breaths before you eat to really deactivate that sympathetic mode and get yourself into rest and digest mode. So close your eyes, take 3 to 5 slow breaths, and then slow down, chew your food up completely into a mash. So that means 20 to 30, maybe even 40 times per bite, depending on the food. You count a few times just to get an idea what that's like, setting your fork down, being mindful. You may consider also adding digestive bitters or apple cider vinegar before meals. So for apple cider vinegar, you can start with a couple teaspoons and maybe even build up to a couple tablespoons mixed in water. Don't try this if you have acid reflux or irritation, active irritation, I should say. And then bitters is just you would follow the label amount, and you usually take that 10 to 15 minutes before you eat. And then don't chug water with your meals. You can sip, but we don't want to drink a lot of water with our meals. And then also, I would say taking a gentle walk after eating is great for motility as well. If you've made it this far, you've already learned so much about digestion. And hopefully, you're feeling a lot more empowered to support your body with simple foundational habits. But sometimes the basics are not enough. So, if you are having some of those red flags or you feel you just need more support, definitely schedule a 15-minute consult with us because we help people one on one to address what's really going on with their digestion and help them feel better. Our 15-minute calls, 15-minute free strategy calls are just so we can hear about what you're dealing with, what you've tried, and what your goals are. And then we can put together a map about how we can help you move forward. Just to summarize, undigested food is not necessarily a bad thing, but we do want to listen to our body's signals. So thank you so much for joining me today. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who needs to hear this message.